all our guests for coming in today. I again want to commend you, Keira, on your recent efforts, but not just your recent efforts, your fight in general for your two brothers and all of the other children who are affected. I spoke with your dad outside Leinster House and explained that my background is working with neurodiverse children and their families, so I'd be very aware of the struggles. And I suppose I'd love to hear your thoughts today on, so we have this wave coming in what's already a huge problem. And I'm just wondering around looking at the children who are on the assessment of needs list who will be permanently damaged and those on the assessment of needs list who won't. And is there a way that we might be able to nearly make a priority list on the assessment of needs waiting list? And what I mean by that is some children who are already, we'll say, within schools who are waiting for an assessment of needs but are, we'll say, accessing supports for perceived dyslexia, people who are already getting an SNA, SET hours, engaging with the NEP service, versus those who are waiting for assessment of needs that need maybe an autism diagnosis to get into an autism class or to get into a special school. So there had been changes, a number of years ago where the government recognised we're way behind here in assessment of needs, so let's provide services before we get a diagnosis in some areas. And then there's other cases where you need that diagnosis to get into an autism class or into a special school. What would your thinking be on prioritising the assessment of needs waiting list on those children who are currently not accessing services because of their delay?
Yes, I suppose I might come in there again because that's very, very technical. I suppose let's just talk about the reality. Like the assessment of needs right now, the parent applies for it, and where like we're from in Tipperary, it's 48 months. So straight away, the parent just has to put that to one side, like it's not going on. Eventually they'll knock on my door. Now I have to get a private psychologist to get my child into a school. That's the reality of what's going on. What's wrong is, and again, I'll just give a simple example. In both of our sons' cases, the HSE paid for that private assessment. Now, I have brought this previously to the Oireachtas members here. I think it's so wrong that there's one rule for the Dermody 2 children and everyone else has to pay for their private assessment.
Can I stop for a minute just to ask, just because I want to get your thought on this. So say I have a child who has perceived dyslexia or sensory processing disorder or ADHD, for example, and they can at the moment access services based on their potential diagnosis, where you have kids maybe who are 2 that might need to access home tuition or an autism class, and they will need the diagnosis to access that service. Would you be in favour of prioritising the assessment of needs list based on those who are currently not accessing services because they don't have their diagnosis?
I suppose right now that's a legislative matter. Like the AON has to take priority because it is the law for that to take priority. So it would take a change of legislation for anything different to happen. But it does all come down to, like right now, they have started recruiting for the in-service. And my understanding is, to be fair to the government, there is a great pickup and they've got lots of applications. But the CDNT is toxic. So it's like a car crash. And Deputy Arda said yesterday in the Dáil that the CNT model is broken. So why are we persisting with it? The problem I have, I just know we'll be here next year. And so when the Taoiseach hears his own deputy telling him that, standing up and telling him, you just know there's not going to be any action from that. I mean, that should be a wake-up moment saying, God, my own are telling me this is broken. So, the answer is there. The system is 100% broken with the CDNT. That because the AON has to be done by the law, but now we're not doing that, so we break the law. The optics of this are just terrible, as well. The optics for anyone looking in. But that's the bottom line. You're going to need extra staff. But the Taoiseach conceded that they have not. There are psychologists, over 4,000, working away every single day in this country, and no one has knocked on the door and said, "I need you. This is an emergency. I need you now."
I'm running out of time, so I will say I definitely knocked on doors in Mayo, and there definitely wasn't availability, but it might be different around the country. I'm just going to go to Leanne if I have time. So Leanne, I really appreciated your presentation, and I'm looking around dignity in some of the assessments for disabled people. So for example, the primary medical certificate, if you need to get an augmented car, you have to walk from one side of the room to the other to prove that you need it. Could you give any other tangible examples where lived experience engaging with departments is uncomfortable in the likes of looking for that primary medical certificate, and it's with the Department of Finance rather than with the department that deals with disability?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just in the broader tense around engaging with disabled people and through disabled persons organisations. We're talking a lot about assessment. We're inevitably going to talk about the Disability Act because it frames a lot of that discussion. It's worth recognising that came out of the Commission for People with Disabilities in 1993. We had a Time for Equality in 1995 that recognised where Ireland was at then was sheltered workshops, segregated education, zero opportunities for disabled people in employment. So the Act that came out in 2005 was seen as reasonably progressive because it's not only looking at assessment, it's looking at things at targets for recruitment of disabled people in employment. But it's 20 years old and it's post-ratification of the CRPD. And I think this bit's really important is there's elements of it that don't sit with where we're at now. So we do actually need to review it in its totality. So if you look at the definition of disability under the Act, it states that disability is a person who has a substantial restriction in the capacity to carry out a profession, business or occupation in the state, or to participate in social or cultural life in the state by reason of an enduring physical, sensory, mental health or intellectual impairment. It's very much of an old-style medical analysis of disability, what people lack. If we think about the CRPD is where we're at now, the CRPD defines disability as someone who has a long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairment which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So we've ratified the CRPD, so we're talking about what are the systemic barriers that prohibit people's participation in education, in employment, in social life. So we take the education element, your point, we should be looking at, it's a mainstream first approach for CRPD. How do we make inclusive education a reality? What are the supports children need? Education isn't just about a qualification. It's about participating in your community with your siblings. It's about normalising impairment as part of the human condition and recognising some people will need additional supports within the education system. What we have, just very briefly, is a system that doesn't work for disabled people. It doesn't work for the system itself because we end up in legislative conversations or we're brought to the High Court. People are bringing a case to the High Court as opposed to how do we resource inclusion? How do we resource the CRPD? That's got to be the fundamental conversation for this House going forward.